On the 3rd of June, 2026, in a small house in Kathmandu, a woman named Dawa Sherpa and her daughter began the funeral rites for a man who was not yet dead. Hillary Dawa Sherpa, her husband, 52 years old, had been missing on Mount Everest for 5 days. No one was searching for him in any serious way. The expedition company that employed him had not sent a helicopter. The government had not returned his family's calls. By the time the funeral rites began in Kathmandu, they did not know that he had already survived the crevasse and had been crawling toward them alone for 3 days. The next morning, a garbage collection crew working above base camp found him crawling in the snow. By all accounts, this is meant to be an inspirational story. Instead, it reveals a pattern that has been costing Sherpas their lives, quietly, for 30 years. To understand what he did to survive when most thought it was impossible, and why his survival became an accusation against the industry that nearly let him die, you have to look at what the system was supposed to do and at what it did instead. Before you continue, if you're fascinated by the science of survival at extreme altitude, be sure to check out our high-altitude survival guide linked in the description. Hillary Dawa Sherpa came from a town called Okoldhunga in the foothills south of Everest. He was 52 years old, with a wife named Damu, a teenage daughter named Mendo Lamu, and a career on the world's tallest peaks that stretched back further than most of his clients had been alive. He worked for a small Kathmandu-based outfitter called Himalayan Traverse. His first name had been given to him in honor of the New Zealander, whose footsteps he had spent his life retracing. The 2026 spring season was the busiest in Mount Everest's recorded history. Nepal issued 492 climbing permits, the most ever. Approximately 950 climbers, guides, and high-altitude workers reached the summit. The government collected in permit fees alone the equivalent of $7.5 million and over 1 billion Nepalese rupees in total revenue when fees, royalties, and expedition charges were added together. May 29th was the final day of that season. It was also the 73rd anniversary of the first ascent of Mount Everest by Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay in 1953. On that morning, the man named in honor of Edmund Hillary was high on the mountain with his Polish client. The two had been attempting the summit, but the client developed frostbite during the push and could not continue. Another Sherpa guide began descending with him toward Camp 2. Hillary Dawa stayed behind to follow. He was last seen near Camp 3, at 7,060 meters, resting before the final descent. Then the mountain became silent. The British climber Chris Thrall, the last person on the mountain to see him, said later that he looked back up the route and never saw Hillary Dawa come down. Serious alarm bells, Thrall said, were ringing. The season was ending. The route through the Khumbu icefall was being dismantled. And the man who had been guiding clients up Mount Everest for most of his adult life, on the same anniversary that had made his namesake famous, was, somewhere above the dismantled ladders, alone. In a video recorded after his rescue, Hillary Dawa described what had happened to him in the days no one could see. He had slipped and fallen into a crevasse near Camp 1 at approximately 6,000 meters. The crevasse was deep enough that the light from above did not reach him. He was alone. He had no oxygen, he had no food, he had no radio contact with base camp. He was inside the ice for 2 days. The temperature inside a crevasse at 6,000 meters in late May is below freezing day and night. The walls do not move. The light from above changes slowly, and then quickly, and then disappears. Climbers who have spent shorter periods inside crevasses at lower altitudes have described the experience as a kind of frozen waiting, the body slowly losing temperature, the mind moving through the small inventory of possibilities. Most climbers in that situation are recovered by their teammates within hours. The teammates above lower a rope. The climber clips in. The climber comes out. Hillary Dawa had no teammates above him. His Polish client was already off the mountain. The other Sherpa guide had descended with the client. The route through the Khumbu icefall, between Hillary Dawa's position and base camp, was being dismantled by the icefall doctors who had assumed the season was over. He freed himself. The exact mechanics of that self-extraction have not been publicly detailed. What is known is that he climbed out of the crevasse using whatever combination of strength, technique, and equipment was available to him after 2 days in the cold. Sherpa climbers of his experience carry, on the descent, a basic kit: ice axe, crampons, harness, a sender, length of rope. With 2 days inside the ice and frostbite already setting into his hands, even the most routine of self-rescue techniques would have been an act of survival rather than skill. The climbing community has called what he did one of the most extraordinary acts of self-rescue in modern mountaineering. Pemba Sherpa, the executive director of 8K Expeditions, said it directly. "As far as I know, no one has survived alone at that altitude on Everest so far." Lakpa Sherpa, the director of the same company, called it one of the most incredible things we've ever seen on Mount Everest. The Norwegian climber Kristen Harilla, who holds the record for ascending the world's 14 8,000ers, told Outside Magazine that his survival shows that as long as there is hope, people manage to stay alive. Aung Shering Sherpa, a leading figure in the Nepali climbing community, called it nothing short of a miracle. He stood up on the surface of the glacier. He looked down through the Khumbu icefall at a route that no longer existed, and he started to crawl. From the position where he had escaped the crevasse, near Camp 1 at 6,000 meters, to the lower Khumbu icefall, where he would eventually be found, the descent was approximately 700 vertical meters. By the time he was found, he had descended from approximately 7,600 meters at Camp 4 to 5,300 meters at base camp, a vertical drop of more than 2,300 meters alone, with no oxygen, no food, no water, and frostbite that was already destroying tissue on both of his hands. He moved through what international press would later describe as terrain of rocks and ice. He slept on the glacier. He crawled when he could not walk. He kept moving because the alternative was to stop. And stopping at that altitude was the alternative the system had already prepared his family to accept. What kept him going has not been publicly described. He has given a video account since his rescue. He has not explained in detail the mind of a man crawling alone for 4 days through a route designed to be lethal under exactly his conditions. What is clear is that he kept moving, and that he did so without the institutional support that, in any prior season, would have been the default. On June 2nd, 4 days after Hillary Dawa had gone missing, the Nepalese guide company 8K Expeditions, which had not employed him but which provided permit services that season, dispatched a helicopter to search for him. The helicopter flew over the upper Khumbu Glacier. It flew over the lower western Khwom. It flew over the icefall. The search team scanned the ice for any sign of him. They saw nothing. Hillary Dawa saw them. According to his own account, given in the days after his rescue, the helicopter passed directly above him as he was crawling down through the icefall. He could hear the rotors. He could see the body of the aircraft against the sky. He waved. He was not seen. The helicopter banked away. In Kathmandu, that same afternoon, Damu Sherpa and Mendo Lamu were preparing for the next day of the funeral. The community of Okaldhunga had been told. The neighbors had come. The Nepali Buddhist funeral ritual lasts for several days, and the family was settling into the second day of it. They had not been informed of the failed helicopter search. They had been informed that there was no longer any meaningful search underway. Hillary Dawa kept crawling. He had been crawling by that point for nearly 4 days. On the morning of June 4th, 2 members of the Sagarmatha Pollution's Control Committee's garbage management team, Bhim Patarai and Durga Rai, were working on the lower Khumbu icefall near a point called Crampon Point when they saw something move in the snow. It was a man. He was crawling. He was sliding more than walking. He was conscious. He recognized them as Sherpas. Bhim and Durga brought him down. They gave him food. They gave him water. A helicopter was dispatched from Lukla. By that afternoon, Hillary Dawa Sherpa was at Ham's Hospital in Kathmandu in the emergency ward, being treated for severe frostbite on both hands and complete physical exhaustion. His wife and daughter learned he was alive from local news reports and a phone call from a person they knew. They were on the second day of his funeral. Mendo Lamu, his teenage daughter, told the Associated Press that the family had not been able to believe it at first. They had asked for photographs to be sent before they would let themselves accept the news. "When we first heard about it," she said, "we could not be sure if that person was indeed our father. So, to be certain, we asked for photos to be sent, and then only we were sure and very happy." Damu and Mendolhamu went to the hospital. He recognized them. He could speak. The doctor said he was stable and out of danger. The family that had been mourning him that morning spent the rest of June 4th in the emergency ward with him, listening to a voice they had stopped expecting to hear again. The hospital reunion was where the survival story ended. What Damu Sherpa said next was something else entirely. The international press has carried the survival in detail. CNN, the Associated Press, Reuters, the BBC, and the major Indian newspapers all ran versions of the same piece: the miraculous rescue, the cleaning crew that spotted him, the family that had begun his funeral. What most of them did not carry in any detail was what Damu Sherpa said when she visited her husband at Ham's hospital. She made her statements first to the Tourism Times, then to Nepali outlets that the Alan Arnett Mountaineering Tracker has compiled. She said, of Himalayan Traverse, the company that employed her husband. This happened because of Himalayan Traverse's negligence, she said of the government. Dawa went missing on May 29th, and we immediately contacted authorities for help, but we received no response. Meanwhile, the government boasts of a record revenue of over 1 billion rupees from Everest expeditions this season. So why did they ignore our calls, she said of the liaison officer. Why didn't the liaison officer act promptly to find Dawa, despite the government officer accepting thousands of dollars from the handling company, she said of the broader silence. This is not just about Dawa. It's a show of disrespect to all Sherpa climbers who risk their lives to ensure their foreign clients' success on Mount Everest. She said finally, what no Nepali Sherpa wife has publicly said with this kind of clarity in a generation. She announced her intention to pursue legal action against those responsible. The funeral she had begun was now an accountability claim. The questions Damu Sherpa is asking are not new. Every one of them has been raised in some form by the Nepali Sherpa community for the last decade. What makes her case different is that the question is no longer being asked in the abstract. The Nepalese government deploys liaison officers to every commercial expedition on Mount Everest. They are paid by the expedition operators, monitored by the Department of Tourism, and are theoretically responsible for safety coordination, summit verification, and incident response. In 1996, after the disaster that produced into thin air, the liaison officer system was reformed as part of the broader institutional response to the 8 lives lost on the South Col. The reforms were supposed to ensure that no future climber would be lost without an institutional response. In 2019, the Center for Investigative Journalism, Nepal, documented that 13 of the 37 liaison officers deployed for the spring season that year had submitted their reports without ever reaching base camp. The audit was not contested. The system was, by its own standards, not functioning. The liaison officer assigned to Hillary Dawa Sherpa's expedition is, in 2026, the latest data point in a 7-year pattern of institutional non-response that the government has not addressed. The helicopter that Himalayan Traverse did not dispatch is the latest data point in a separate pattern. In 2023, Nepal authorized helicopter cargo ferrying above base camp to reduce Sherpa crossings of the Khumbu icefall. The infrastructure exists. The pilots exist. The communications equipment exists. What did not exist, in the case of Hillary Dawa Sherpa, was the institutional decision to deploy it. The 1 billion rupees in Everest revenue that Damu Sherpa cited is the latest figure in a 33-year trajectory of commercial expansion that has, by every measure, made the industry larger without making the labor force inside it safer. Each season produces more permits, more clients, more revenue, more news coverage, more documentaries, and the same questions every time a Sherpa goes missing. The questions have answers. The answers have, for 30 years, been ignored. The simplest version of the story is that Hillary Dawa Sherpa survived something the human body should not have survived. 2 days inside a crevasse at 6,000 meters. 4 more days crawling through the most dangerous section of the world's most photographed mountain. No food, no oxygen, frostbite on both hands, a helicopter that flew over him without seeing him, a family that had begun his funeral. He survived all of that because of who he is. A man from Okaldhunga, raised in the mountains with a lifetime of high-altitude work in his body, and a knowledge of the Khumbu icefall that few people on Earth possess. Aang Sharing Sherpa was right when he said that Sherpas are built tough growing up in the mountains. Hillary Dawa Sherpa is among the toughest men on earth. What he should not have had to survive is the institutional silence that surrounded the first 5 days of his absence. That silence was not a function of his toughness, or the mountain's geography, or the weather, or the bad luck of a fall into a crevasse. It was a function of decisions, made or not made, by an expedition company, a government, and a liaison officer who had every resource necessary to act, and did not. He survived the mountain. The mountain was not what almost took him. The announcement that Damu Sherpa intends to pursue legal action is the most consequential single statement that came out of the rescue. Nepali Sherpa families have, for decades, accepted institutional silence in exchange for the wages the climbing season produces. The legal action she has announced is, in effect, a public statement that the family will no longer accept the trade. What her case will test is whether the Nepalese legal system has the structure to hold a commercial expedition company, a government office, and a liaison officer simultaneously accountable for a non-response that nearly produced a fatality. Cases of that scope have not, in the recent history of Nepali mountaineering, been brought successfully. The corruption prosecutions of 2026, the 32-defendant baking soda fraud case, are the first sustained attempt at industry-level accountability in the mountain's modern history. The Damu Sherpa case, if it proceeds, will be the second. Whether it succeeds is a different question. Whether it has been brought is the data point that matters. A Sherpa wife in 2026 has publicly named the system that failed her husband and announced that she will fight it. The last Sherpa walkout, in 2014, was the labor force collectively refusing to keep working under conditions they had finally judged unbearable. The Damu Sherpa lawsuit in 2026 is something newer. A single family refusing to absorb a single non-response, choosing the legal system over silence. That has not happened before in this generation. The rest of the climbing world will be watching to see. Before you go, don't forget to check out the High Altitude Survival Guide in the description below. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and ring the bell. And tell us in the comments what you want Summit X to investigate next. The next forensic breakdown is already in progress.